Everybody, welcome to another episode of Ordinary Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Polk. This is episode 6, and I'm talking to Jessica Green. I guess you and I have probably been Facebook friends about a year, because it was about a year ago that you came into the Anarcho-Christian group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
okay? A little over a year, maybe even 2 years at this point, but yeah, pretty recent.
I remember when you came in. And, I remember you asking questions and going through all that stuff. And so I listened to her interview with Craig on the Bad Roman Project and was just blown away. It was fantastic. And so you came to Anarchism and Faith in Christ from a progressive atheist position. Got that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Right. I ended up in the same place from an evangelical conservative. So we were joking before I started, nobody really plans on ending up in anarchism. It doesn't, it's always some kind of strange accident. So let's lay a little bit of the groundwork first for you and how your political philosophy was formed in the beginning, I guess, and then how that migrated. And really, I think I have to use the word courage that it takes to challenge your own belief and then to even walk away from that belief. So I guess start at the beginning, give us a synopsis of that transformation.
Sure. I have pretty much always been sort of like a nominal Democrat, pretty much where my parents came from, where all of the teachers and, just the people around me were pretty much on the left side of things. And that just seemed the place to be. I didn't really put too much thought into it. The only thing I ever really felt strongly about was that I was anti-war. And that stayed with me and has continued to stay with me through all of this. That is the most consistent position that I've had. And one thing that was strange for me is when Barack Obama was elected, I did feel all of a sudden that the left had given up on the idea of ending the wars in the Middle East. And it did cause me some disillusionment. And I started to kind of there's some dishonesty here. There's some things I'm really uncomfortable with. And, we started hearing things about the Wikipedia leaks, the torture, the drone programs, all of these things started coming out. And it was just more and more, I was this is not a logically consistent position for me to hold. But at the same time, I felt my only other option was to be a Republican. And Lord, I wasn't going to be a Republican, So, we're kind of trucking along, and around I would say around 2013, I started getting really involved in online atheism groups, and progressive leftism and atheism, online atheism specifically, they swim together. They're two sharks that swim in the same water. So you kind of can't really get into one without getting into the other. I do know of some conservative atheists, but they're not part of that whole popular zeitgeist. So I was going along in a very large group on Facebook that I'm not going to mention by name because it always causes me a lot of problems when I do. But I was an admin for a really large atheism group. And after the election of Donald Trump in 2016, I really started to see things in my friends and colleagues that I didn't recognize as liberal. The denial of free speech and things of that nature, which, comparative to now, it seems like things were still pretty liberal then compared to where they are now. But at the time, even then, I was noticing this trend, especially when it comes to free speech, that suddenly we were no longer holding these values. The things that I considered liberal values were no longer being held by these groups. And in 2017, I think it was 2017, Rand Paul got attacked by his neighbor pretty violently. I mean, he put him in the hospital. He had a punctured lung. He had to have surgery. It was awful. And I was like, we have to denounce this. This is an awful thing. This was a political attack by a person who considered themselves a Democrat. And he, didn't deserve to be attacked for his values. And my group of people basically rounded on me for doing that. It happened so fast. It was 0 to 90. It made my head spin. I couldn't believe how fast these people had turned on me. And that same day, people who had known me for over a decade called me a white supremacist sympathizer. And I started getting these awful personal messages about I'm a Nazi and I'm a this and I'm a that. And it was extremely hard for me to take because I was considering myself a social justice warrior. I felt very proud of the fact that I was doing that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, these people hated me, and I was no different than Richard Spencer was to them. That was a really hard pill to swallow, to lose basically all of your friends because they think you're a Nazi now, simply because you don't want to endorse political violence.
Mm-hmm.
So I was what I consider politically homeless for about a year. And I just really kind of had a bad taste in my mouth about all of it. And I crossed paths with Stephen Rose, who is the founder of the Anarcho-Christian group. And I saw something that he said in the Libertarian Mises Caucus group that really struck me. And I don't remember what the thing that he said was.
Can we pause right there?
Sure.
Because how did you end up in the Libertarian Mises Caucus? Was this in that void?
Yeah, it was. The void, that's a great way to put it. Like, the void that I experienced was a really good time for me because I actually opened myself up to listening to people that I was basically not allowed to listen to before. Specifically, a friend of mine had suggested the Tom Woods show. And I was like, if somebody had a year previous to that told me to listen to Tom Woods, it wouldn't have happened. I would have Googled him. I would have seen all of the terrible things that the loser brigade says about Tom. And I would have been like, I'm not listening to this Nazi. I was just the same as the rest of them. But
Tom
because
Woods is,
I had,
Tom Woods is like a gateway drug.
He really is. He really is. And, but I was in this unique point in my life. And I said, well, I know how unfair this mob mentality is. So I'm going to listen to them because, that's what we need to do. We need to open our ideas up to people who don't necessarily agree with us, and be able to listen to them without being reactionaries. When I started listening to him, I thought, wow, a lot of this makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, this is just rational discussion. I really appreciate it. And one thing that really turned my head was, I was a person who was on the left. I care about poor people. I care that they have food and healthcare and all of those things. And Tom and Johan Norberg of the Dead Wrong series made a really compelling case to me that socialism was not the most effective way to deal with poverty. And once I became convinced of that, and I'm a person who would like to see, people alleviated of poverty, I was like, okay, I think it makes more sense to understand that poverty is the baseline. We all start at poverty. And the question is not how do we fight poverty? How do we end poverty? The question is how do we create wealth? And what are policies that we have that have the name of we're going to end poverty, but in effect, what they actually do is prevent people from creating wealth for themselves. And that was extremely compelling to me. So, the event with Rand Paul happened. A lot of people, they have a Ron Paul moment. I had a Rand Paul moment. So that kind of broke me away. As we said, nobody voluntarily leaves their comfort zone. You have to kind of get shaken out of it. And so, although it was a horrible thing at the time, I was extremely grateful and am extremely grateful that I was shaken out of my stupor, my torpor, sleep, as it were, and was able to start listening to people like Tom, like Johan Norberg. And that's how I ended up in the Mises Caucus group. And I met Stephen Rose in there, and he said something that I thought was really compelling. And I wish I remember what the comment was now, but I was like, gosh, that's a really compelling idea. And he said, hey, I have this group, this anarcho-Christian group. And I said, well, I'm an atheist. I'm not a douchebag atheist, but I am an atheist. Is it okay if I observe your group? I just wanted to learn. That was my whole motivation at that time, was I really just want to read and I want to learn from people that I ordinarily wouldn't have listened to. And as you know, that group is full of a lot of people who are very educated about these theological matters and all these different writers and things. It's just a whole world that I hadn't really ever cracked open before. And I, for a long time, was quiet and just observing. And then I started reading on my own, and I had questions. And when I did have questions, I wasn't met with a, well, you should know this. And, I was met with people who wanted to talk to me. And that was a different experience for me.
Yeah.
That's not the way things run in a lot of the progressive leftist groups. It's you either think the right thing and say the right thing, or you're out of here, mister. So I've made so many amazing friends since then. And I've, just had access to books that I never would have opened before, and podcasts. The podcasting world broke it open for me. And there is kind of a joke in the libertarian community that like you're not a real libertarian until you have a podcast. So I started a podcast about 6 months ago, maybe a little more than that. And so hopefully that means that I'm a real libertarian now. But I became convinced of the anarchist position through the anarcho-Christian group. And also, not without getting too personal or into my personal story, you can listen to that on the Bad Roman podcast. That is sort of detailed there. I also, at the same time, found my way to God and found my way to Christ. And that's not something I expected to happen at all. Right. A lot of people, when I tell them about it, they say, what happened? Did you go to jail? Did you have an addiction? Did somebody die? And because they need there to be a reason that I had to go find religion. And it wasn't. I'm in the most prosperous, stable point in my life that I've ever been. And I think because I had that ability to be quiet and listen and absorb things for their merit instead of where they line on the political correctness scale, I was able to hear things for the first time. And I was in my mid-30s before I learned how to listen to other people. But once I did, things began to improve remarkably for me. So that kind of brings me to the table where I'm sitting across from people who, like you said, you come from an evangelical conservative perspective. In 2012, 2013, you and we probably wouldn't even talk to each other. And I talk with you often now. We've had many discussions, and I feel very edified for it.
The anarcho-Christian group is probably the only reason I don't set my Facebook account on fire. Because I love social media, and I love the connection that it's given us as a society. It's overall, it's been a blessing. But I could get rid of Facebook and improve my life, some way, but I can't let go of that group, because there are other Christian groups and Christian libertarian and Christian this and Christian that, and they're just awful. There's so much condemnation and so much shame and so much just nonsense. And, I was as red, white, and blue as you could get. Listen to 16 hours of talk radio every day as a truck driver. I would get up with Sirius XM Patriot in the morning. I'd go to bed with it at night.
That'll do it.
About 2008, I had to turn it off. I was going to drive my truck off a bridge. I just could not take it anymore because, again, Obama comes in and everybody switched places. They rearranged the deck chairs on the Titanic. Yeah. And I'm like, wait a minute, y'all were against bailouts, or no, actually you Republicans, you were for bailouts 6 months ago. Now Obama's in and now you're against it, and I was looking at the Wall Street bailout and going, guys, that's $700,000 million. I mean, that's, y'all throw around 700 billion like it's nothing, but just the sheer enormity of that bailout. And I had listened to Dave Ramsey for years, and David kind of walked us through the economic crisis of 08 and 09 and explained, guys, the state did this. The government encouraged stupid behavior, enabled stupid behavior. And then when it all hell broke loose and it all hit the fan, they're like, oh, well, here's a check. Yeah, it's our fault. And I'm looking around at all of these fiscal conservatives going, y'all have lost your ever loving minds. So
what are you conserving?
I started asking questions, and Mike Church was the last talk radio guy that I could handle. He loved the founders. He loved the Constitution. He produced a lot of his own teaching curriculum. And also about this time, our first child is getting close to school age. And so, and I'm seeing myself as a teacher, because I knew we were going to homeschool. Mm-hmm. And Mike Church interviews Ron Paul. Well, this is about the time of the Giuliani Ron Paul incident in the debate.
Yeah.
And so where most conservatives looked at that and went, Ron Paul's an idiot, yay, Giuliani. Mike Church was going, no. Ron Paul was right in that moment, and he was able to explain it. And then he had Tom Woods on one day, and I'm like, wow, he sounds really smart, but he's not an asshole. And, and he's so articulate and so just nice. He's such a gentleman. And I heard about the Mises Institute. So iTunes had just launched iTunes U on the phone, and you could go in and get courses and from stuff. And Tom Woods' lecture series, A Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, was on there. I listened to that, and I mean, it just blew my mind. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm interested. I have to go verify it all, and I'm looking up Madison and Jefferson and the principles of 1798. And I'm going, oh my God, he's not lying. He didn't make that up. Holy crap. So that was the cascading effect. And then I don't think the conservatives they're probably not as nasty as the left is, like you were talking about. People would unfriend me or mute me or block me, but they're really not going to send me private messages. I've got a guy known since the first grade, calls me a commie. I'm talking about you, Shane. Calls me a little commie all the time because he just loves him some Trump and all this stuff. But that's about it, so. But I still watched as I could see. I was never anti-war, but I started, well, what if that was here? What if some other country was doing to us what we're doing to them? And it just started unraveling. So then I started asking questions about faith. And that was really hard. And
way harder than the political stuff, impossibly harder.
Yeah. Because you're taught, don't question the preacher because he's a man of God. Right. And we were going to a church where the pastor was he preached Jesus really big. He still had some mixture of law in there, but he still preached Jesus really big. And then he retired and another guy took over, and it was just weird. And I wasn't in it, and wanting to question, I couldn't. So because I'm a truck driver, I was only able to be there on Sundays. And we heard that the retired pastor that we liked had started a little Bible college. He'd bought a little church building, and he was going to have a service on Easter. And we're like, we haven't seen him for a while. Let's go down. So we go down and see. Well, I find out that his son, who I had known, was starting a church there. And I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. And I like that guy, but my wife didn't because he was an arrogant jerk, which he'll tell you that to this day. And so we're walking up to the building, and he sees me. He goes, hey, you play drums, right? And I said, yeah. He said, get in here. My drummer didn't show up. So like 5 minutes later, I'm in the band. So, a month or so goes by, and he calls me on a Saturday, and he goes, hey, you want to play drums Sunday? And my truck had broke down. I was in the shop. And I'm like, yeah, why not? So I go down there. That was the first time I heard him preach. Life-changing experience. I had never heard the gospel presented in a way where it wasn't meant to scare the hell out of me, and changed my life. And so, we've been going there since 2015. And so now anarchism and the kingdom message are one and the same.
Right. They really are. Yeah.
And so the anarcho-Christian experience, seeing the Bible, reading the Bible and interpreting the Bible through the lens of Christ changes the whole thing, because it takes out a bunch of stuff and puts in a bunch of stuff. And then I see all those principles of anarchism that truly honor and respect human liberty for every human, not just the one in this geographical area and the one in this geographic. It's for God so loved the world, the whole thing. So
the way that Stephen Rose refers to other like people as image bearers was very important to me, because you realize that even the people you hate, even the people that have repugnant ideas, the racists, the sexists, the homophobes, just all the awful people of the world, they're image bearers of God too. God loves them too. And that is a huge pill to swallow. Like, I'm supposed to love them. Yes. That is the point. That is what makes it so different from what every other kind of ideology in the world will tell you. Because every one of those ideologies tells you it's perfectly okay to hate other people. But as Christians, we're commanded to love our enemies. What a huge idea that is. What an incredibly humanitarian idea that is. And when you study the Bible and you start realizing the context of the time that it was written in, like, this is a liberal, not liberal in the sense of politic. I mean, liberal in the sense of the definition of the word liberal. This is a liberal humanitarian revolution for the time. And it's incredible. And like, I remember reading 1 Samuel 8 specifically for the first time. And it's the chapter where the people are asking for a king. And he's like, what am I supposed to do with these people? They keep asking for a king. And God is like, just give them what they want. It's not you that they hate. It's me. Like, just give them. They're going to hate it. You guys don't want a king. You are going to hate it. But give them what they want. And literally all of the things listed in that chapter that would be the result of having a king are the same corruptions we see in our own government now in 2020. It's so applicable. This book that was written double millennia ago is still so applicable to our lives today. And while when I was an atheist, I there were a lot of criticisms that I think that atheists have of religion and what I like to term corporate Christianity, that are valid, like absolutely valid criticisms. But I think that doesn't necessarily speak to what's in the book. And once I went to the book and started reading the book, it changed the context of Christianity for me completely, including that idea of image bearers, that even the people that you don't like are the image bearers of God, and he loves them more than you can possibly imagine. Like, God loves Mussolini. Yeah, God loves Mussolini. Like, swallow that pill, like, deal with that. And it changes the context of how you're supposed to interact with the world around you completely. And
and the state loves to set itself up as savior. A friend of mine and I were discussing this issue of, where pedophilia and Epstein and all this stuff and human trafficking. And I said, look, if a gang gets together and goes and rounds up the pedophile and beats him to death, I don't necessarily cheer that, because I cannot in good conscience say that a person who has that proclivity has not at some point also been a victim. They hurting people hurt people.
Yep.
And the state really only has one tool in its toolbox, and that's violence.
Yep.
And when I fully accept all the tenets of anarchism, well, violence and coercion are taken out of my toolbox. I've got to find another way to deal with a pedophile. I've got to find another way to deal with an adulterer. I've got to find another way to deal with a drug addict. I've got to find another way to deal with a bank robber, other than just violence
And that's having to find another way to deal with yourself.
Right.
Too, because of what you want to do versus what you need to do, different things.
Yeah. And so and I thought about doing a separate post on this, but I was thinking the other day, empathy is hard. Empathy sucks. As we're talking right now, there are a lot of people that are legitimately terrified. Yeah. I don't share their fear and I don't share their terror, but that doesn't change the fact that they are legitimately freaking the hell out right now and experiencing a genuine fear. And so it's so easy to come off as callous if I reject the notion that of the things that they believe. But I have to respect the fact that they're scared.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean I'm going to dance when you ring the bell, so you're going to have to figure out a way to handle that.
I get in a lot of trouble for not dancing for the bell.
Oh, buddy, you ain't kidding. And so, here in West Virginia, our illustrious leader, is issued a mask mandate and has just really made businesses' lives a living hell. And people are like, well, the governor said it. And I'm like, well, if you look at the organizational chart on their website, he's at the bottom and I'm at the top. So, I mean, he's my employee. I'm not in his chain of command. He's in my chain of command. Right. Look, I saw the piece of paper. I saw that he wrote it down. Yes, he signed his name to it. And there's a bunch of whereas and therefore and this, that, and the other. And, but I have made a decision for myself and my family of how I'm going to behave when it comes to lots of fears, Sure. And one of those legitimate criticisms of corporate Christianity is we've got these 150, 200 year old beliefs about rapture and end times and all this stuff. And people expect you to behave a certain way because of what they believe and the fear that's generated. And I'm going, nah, I'm just not going to do that. Right. And it evokes a visceral reaction from them because, well, how you have to, you're going to burn in hell. And I'm like, maybe not. Now that is interesting. If you come from atheist to Christ in such a short period of time, like, what did you do when you encountered these different types of, which I've only recently introduced all the amillennial and premillennial and postmillennial and the tribulation and all these different terms and stuff.
That stuff is way above my pay grade. And in my mind, Christianity is not only for the theological scholar. It's for the person who can't even read too. So there's a part in Matthew where they ask him, what is the most important law? And it's to love. Love me as I have loved you. That's the most important law. So yeah, there are people, for example, who are Christian who don't think you should be eating pork, right? Or that, you have to follow this rule or that rule. I think at the end of the day, if you didn't even know how to read, but you knew the law was to love and to love others as Christ has loved you, and you did that, that would be the operative thing. That would be the most important thing. And so, like, I pay special attention to the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount doesn't have any rules about what you eat and what you wear. And, there are 600 different laws in the Torah about, every little tiny aspect of life. And they ask Jesus at one point, like, what about these people breaking these rules? They weren't washing their hands before they ate the bread, I think was the specific thing. He says it's not what goes into a man that defiles him, it's what comes out of him, the words that he speaks to the others around him. And this theme of the way you treat others is the absolute most operative thing that I find. So when people are discussing annihilationism and things like that, I'm like, these are details that, while interesting, I don't know how important they really are. Because do I think the one that believes it and the one that doesn't, this one will go to hell? I don't know. I mean, of course, I'm not God, but I just don't think that there's anything in Jesus's teachings to suggest that that's the case. As long as they treat each other with love, and the annihilationists and the whoever else, they treat each other with love, then that's how you'll know who my people are, that they love each other. And just that theme of love is over and over and over and over again. And, you know, that's where my baseline of beliefs has come from. Even when I was an atheist, I was like, you should treat people the right way. And what I didn't realize is that the reason I feel that way, and the reason every modern American person feels like you should take care of the poor and take care of the environment and love people, that's an inheritance to us from our Judeo-Christian background. So even a person who doesn't carry around a specific belief of God in their heart still has this cultural Christianity that informs them to, you know, feed widows and orphans. That comes to us from Christianity. There's absolutely no denying that in my mind. And in that way, Christianity has, for the last 1,000 years, been incrementally, as it's carried through the world, been improving the state of things. Every place that adopts that theology, every place that adopts the teachings of Jesus becomes a better place to be. And so now there are places where that idea gets corrupted by politics. That, to me, is the state. The state invades that. And any place where the state puts its finger, that becomes corrupt. So you can corrupt Christians too, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that the message in the book is what the operative thing is. So every time someone starts arguing with me about, like, I don't know, I have people post things on my Facebook wall about, well, this writer said this. And there was a specific commandment, thou shalt not worship false idols, I think it was. And to prove his point, he took an excerpt from a book and put that excerpt, a picture of that excerpt, on my wall. And I'm just like, yeah, the book says this, and you're saying this. So I think I'm going to go with a very simple instruction that was given to me by the Lord, not necessarily the long-winded approach taken by some theological scholar 1,000 years hence. It just, you know, I think we overcomplicate it. You know, we're human beings. We have this brain, this amazing brain that God gave us, that its function is to question, you know, and it would be a waste of that brain not to question things. But at the same time, the pitfall there is that we can overcomplicate. And I think it's really simple. It seems so simple to me. Simply love one another. And you will be guided by that. You know, you pray to God, you say, God, guide me, and you love people. And you really can't go wrong, whether you eat pork or not. I don't think it matters.
Right.
You know?
Well, I don't remember who I first saw it. Saw it a few times. Is point out the irony that people want the 10 Commandments posted on the courthouse lawn, but not the Sermon on the Mount. You know, because it's very hard to take the Sermon on the Mount and justify ruling over people and using violence against people, but you can use those 10 Commandments and justify all kinds of bad behavior.
You can, but you have to take a very simple statement and you have to add a lot to it,
right,
in order to do that most of the time.
One of my favorite teachers, is a guy named Jamie Englehart, and he talked about logic being removed from Christianity over the years, because if you try to use logic and you try to really dig into the true meaning of the scriptures, which he was saying there's one interpretation, and that's for the people that were there at that time. That's the one interpretation. So you have to start there, you know, and what was it saying to them? And context. Then I can extract, for what it means for me. But he said logos, that's comes from God. Logic comes from God. And so why would he not want you to use logic to really examine what comes from the Spirit and what comes from the book? And, you know, it's just been so refreshing to, cause I forget how fortunate I am, because I hear the horror stories of people that have tried, they try to go to church. They want to be engaged in some sort of local body, but they're not, it's not a church of Jesus. It's a church of America, you know? And I'm so fortunate to have a church and a pastor that is not waving the American flag. He's waving Jesus, you know? And I'm really spoiled by that big time, because
I mean, there are innumerable horror stories that come from church experiences, and that could break your heart in two. That since the medieval era, that the church has been a power structure, and whatever power structures are involved, you have corruption, because it's one human trying to rule over another human. But this is preached against specifically in the Bible. Like, you know, that's kind of almost the idea in saying, hey, you don't need to have a king like other nations, because you're not trying to have rule over all these people. These people are already ruled by me. I'm God, you know, not, of course I'm, you know, paraphrasing, but, you know, so like, but anytime you get money involved, anytime you get power involved, it's going to be tainted. And I can't at all look at those horrible experiences that people have had with the church and tell them like, oh, they just give it another whack. Like, of course you're not going to want to have anything to do with that. But, you know, God is not a building. He's not a congregation. He's not a pastor, you know? So those are human things that, you know, if you've had bad experiences with them, it's okay to just have a relationship with God yourself. Yeah. Like, most of us can read. If you can read, you can read the Bible. And if you really have a fertile heart, it will speak to you directly. And that's something that, I mean, I read the Bible from trying to get a historical perspective many, many years ago, and did not understand it, not really, like the way I understood it when I began to read it with an open heart. And then I was reading a book that talked to me, Jessica, directly as a human being. And that was a almost a startling and frightening experience at first. That I can open this book and it talks to me like, what? Like, but what you were saying about logic, God gave us an incredible brain, and not to use it is almost a slap in the face of the creator. And so, like, my husband is a physicist, for example, and he works with like Ivy League physicists, some of the smartest people I'll ever be in a room with. And a lot of these men are men of faith. And it used to be that churchmen were the ones who held the candle of education. Like, these were the churchmen were the scientists. And, you know, that's a different perspective now, unfortunately, because it's become more about power and things like that. But it used to be that those were the men who tended the light of logic, tended the light of education. And I can relate to that idea incredibly so. Like, to be an educated person, I think you need to have a full understanding of the Bible, and a full understanding of the Bible in historical context, using your human brain and asking questions. Like, why wouldn't you ask a question? That's what God gave you a brain to do, you know?
So taking the faith section of it, setting it to the side, the anarchism is something that we just use that word, you know, we just let it roll right out. But when someone turns on the news and they see some pinhead throwing a rock through a window and the news calls them anarchists, you know, I chuckle and I'm like, there's nobody that loves the state more than these people. Okay. So trust me, they're not anarchists. All right. But there is a problem of labels, because the word conservative, the word liberal, the word socialist, the word communist, fascist, they all have specific meanings. The problem is they mean 72 different things to 72 different people. One, it's a badge of honor; to another, it's a scourge of the earth. So,
that's, you know, talked about in the Bible, by the way, how language would be like split and we wouldn't be able to communicate with each other because our language would become different. And I think that really shows, even when you speak English and you're speaking to another English speaker, you might be saying something and they hear something completely different than what you mean.
That's a
And like the
fantastic
meanings are
point.
scattered. And I'm like, wow, there's an example of that right there.
So we see real problems in the world. We see real strife, real pain, real death, real starvation. But I feel like we have, and it's not that we're the only enlightened ones, but I think we're just willing to look and say there are proven ways of addressing these problems without pointing guns at people. You know, I had a conversation at this picnic I was at today with an agricultural commissioner, pretty solid guy. You know, we talked about cannabis and hemp and, you know, and we talked about regulation, and not all regulation's good, and with some of it's necessary. And, you know, but with lots of, well, who's going to do this thing and that thing, and who's going to
Who will
protect the
build the
consumer?
roads?
Right. Um,
No roads.
right. Oh, one of my favorite memes of all time is a ribbon, roads, a technological marvel so complex that no private person could ever build one. You know, and I make my living on the roads, you know, and what's always been fascinating to me is I'll say something against taxation or the state, and, oh, what, you don't really use the roads? Look, my one truck pays about 30 grand a year in taxes. And out of that 30 grand, they waste about 90% of it, and 10% of it actually makes it to the road. So I don't want to hear it.
And they're crappy roads half the time.
They are, you know, which also, though, you know, if you crumbling infrastructure, you know, because they've got to come up with more money to go kill brown people on the other side of the planet. And so crumbling infrastructure is like their buzzword for, well, we need to tax you more. So, you know, really, because we need to go kill these brown people, but it's for the roads. But overcoming that, it's religious like faith in the state is so difficult for people, which they legitimately can't think of another way. And one analogy I've tried to make, but it usually didn't work. But there was a time, use Elvis Presley, for example. Okay. In the 1950s, if Elvis Presley wanted people to hear his music, well, he had to go to someone that had the recording equipment. Then he had to take that to someone that had the radio station. And he had to take that to someone that had the distributive power, had the ability to invest in the network, and then send it to someone who had the distribution network to retail to make it to the consumer. Okay. You and I right now have the potential to be talking to 7 billion people.
Yeah.
Just with this connection.
That's right.
And so I'm not saying we have to burn all the record companies to the ground. You know, I don't have to go forcibly take their market share away from them, but I'm not going to let you tell me that it's illegal to use YouTube to put music out, or to take my music go record it and take it directly to Spotify or directly to Apple Music or directly to whoever. I don't necessarily need that hierarchical institution anymore. So if it goes away, it goes away, you know, but we can't seem to get over that hump of thinking that, well, you know, I mean, if the state goes away, how are we going to replace whatever that some essential functions right now, like it or not, are handled by the state? Titling, registration of ownership, identification, those are legitimately held by the state. I think the private market could do better, and I think they will do better with blockchain, crypto, and all the stuff that's happening. But we're so distracted we can't see it, because if you want to take titling and ownership registration away from the state, it's the response is, well, remember, the terrorists are going to come and kill you, so don't look away, citizen. You know, that's like,
right. There's always some boogeyman around the corner.
Right. Yes. Right. Constant fear, constant. And here's a great analogy. So I'm in West Virginia. We have a Republican billionaire, Trump supporter for governor. Okay. And he's proud of it. He's got Trump on speed dial. He has effectively shut down the legislative branch of the government, and the judicial branch is out to lunch. And we got about $2 billion in federal funds, and he's appointed himself to appropriate those funds wherever he sees fit. And the progressives are silent.
Yeah.
That is how effective fear is. You know, a billionaire Republican Trump supporting governor is doing all these things, and the Democrats and the progressives have just disappeared. They just,
yeah, it's not about logical consistency at all.
No. And you would think, what a ripe target. But they're all so terrified. Mm-hmm. And probably with the progressives, because their God now is science. They worship at the altar of science. Oh, well, the scientist said so. We're just going to have to let him, run roughshod over everybody, and we can't stop him. We can't shut him down because we'll all die.
As a science-minded person, that makes me cringe incredibly, especially when they utter the words "settled science." It's like, number one, you have faith. You're having faith in something that you don't understand. You're just putting your faith in it. And anybody who is a scientist or science-minded knows that science is proven wrong almost constantly. It changes. There's no bedrock for you to rest on when it comes to science.
And I blame the media for that. The media, eggs are bad. Eggs are good. Milk is bad. Milk's good. It's good. It's bad. It's good. A new study says it's good. It's good. It's bad. It's good. It's good. Wait.
A study means nothing.
Nothing.
You can put a study. There are these people who put 15 or so studies out that said nothing but gibberish. And they just titled them with things that would popularly be acceptable ideas. These studies were not even reviewed before they were published in medical journals. There is a humongous political problem in science right now. And it's all about where funding goes. And so the idea that we're just going to blindly place our faith in scientists because they're somehow this priesthood of integrity is foolish, absolutely foolish thing to do. Now, I'm not saying that there are not valuable advances that we have because of science. Like my own husband, his job title is scientist. I have great respect for science, but to treat it like a priesthood or a religion, that's every bit as much faith as a zealot, any religious zealot. And I see that in people, that they treat science the same as they treat a religion. And they scoff and stuff when you say stuff like that, but generally it's true because people will say things like, I believe in evolution. I mean, you shouldn't believe in evolution. You should understand evolution. You can understand that, but you haven't taken the trouble to do that. So you just believe what you were told, written by men who wrote books that you've never met, and you have a leap of faith in it. But you've never pored over the data. You've never looked at the record yourself. You have faith. It's the same as a religion, and so as much as people want to mock that, that's because they feel a moral superiority, which is kind of a mark of religion as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the best arguments that we can make against the state is when it becomes entangled. And I love to use that word because of Keith Giles's Jesus Untangled. But when science is entangled with the state, if you go back to, the music distribution example, well, there was a time when someone had to own that distributive power of information, the New York Times and whether or not they began this journey as a noble enterprise to disseminate information, it's now all owned by the advertisers.
Right.
And so when I broke away from that a decade ago, and I don't consume Fox News, I don't consume CNN or MSNBC. Number one, there's a big difference between reading a news story and watching it with all the clicks and flashes and the B-roll and the constant
it's designed. Assault. It's designed specifically to get into the mind.
And so when something like the current problem arises, when this popped up in January, I looked up and I went, wonder if that's real. Might be real. Let me wash my hands real good for about a week. And then I start going to the sources that I have come to trust that aren't mainstream. And there's lots of doctors and scientists and epidemiologists, and I'm hearing what they're saying, and they're going, no, this is wrong, and this is incorrect, and well, this has been manipulated to look this way. And after about a week, I'm like, nah, I'm not doing it, and I just completely unplugged from the whole thing. I'm still well aware of what's going on. You're not informed. Oh, I am. I'm just not informed through CNN and Fox News. And I know that breaks your heart. But
that's what I'll hear, like trust the experts. And it's like, okay, but there are lots of other experts that don't agree with the hand-picked experts that you've chosen. And, like, we're in this house, we are science-minded people. So my husband is going through these like these data in ways that I don't understand, like he's actually like a physical scientist, and he's going through this data and pointing out where things are kind of off, things are kind of skewed, and people are telling him he's uninformed, he's not scientific. And I'm like, he's the most scientific person I've ever met in my life. What are you talking about? But no, it's not that he's not scientific, he's not towing the narrative.
Right.
And that's what it is. It's a narrative. And if you're not doing the right narrative, you're a crackpot, even though you are, there are Oxford scientists, there are Stanford scientists that are coming out against what the popular narrative is. And those people are utterly dismissed. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, wait a minute, I thought you told me to trust the experts.
Yeah. Well, they're not only dismissed, they're canceled. They're shut down.
Yeah.
The funding's gone, and they're, I remember this experience that I had probably about a year or two. I started driving a truck over the road in 97. So it was probably in the first 2 years, and I'm home, and the local CBS affiliate does this little piece on trucking and how dangerous it is. And I'm watching that, and I'm going, none of that's true.
Yeah.
And my response was, oh, why do they hate trucking? Why do they hate trucking so bad? Because they're just making this stuff up. Well, then I finally slowly realized it's not just trucking. They hate industry. They hate the coal industry. They hate the, trucking, whatever they can use to terrify people with.
Yep.
And I have forgotten more about the trucking industry than a bunch of these experts could ever hope to learn.
Yeah.
Is that because I'm some kind of genius? No, I've got 23 years of experience inside this industry and have seen it from the inside. And then I see these experts that have never seen a truck, but they're going to tell me, this is how it's going to be. And I'm going, no, you're full of crap. You're an idiot. You don't have any idea what you're talking to. But then the people, well, the experts said,
there's this effect. Tim Pool pointed it out. Sorry to interrupt you, but Tim Pool pointed it out that he would read an article on skateboarding, and he's like an experienced skateboarder. He'd be like, they don't have any of this right. Like, I'm a skateboarder. I know this stuff. This is crazy. But as soon as the topic is something else besides skateboarding, you trust it implicitly. Well, why don't you understand that they're making that shit up every bit? Sorry, they're making that stuff up every bit as much as they were making it up when they were writing the piece about skateboarding or trucking. Yeah. And there's also a thing in news media that's occurred over the last 5 or 6 years, which is the idea of siding with your audience. So the fourth estate, which is what the press is supposed to be, is basically telling their audiences what they'd like to hear, and they no longer fulfill their function. They just don't want to be sacrificed to the mobs that they have created. So they're no longer willing to tell uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
And that's what the function of the press used to be. And it's not now. It's make sure that the viewers that we have stay viewers so that they'll stay here and watch our commercials. Yeah. And so they've given up their right to be considered authoritative sources. You have to go to outside sources that people aren't going to consider credible. But what is a credible source? An official source? A well-established source? Well, those sources have proven themselves to be without integrity. So, where do you go for information now? You have to do the best you can. But you certainly can't just say, okay, well, the New York Times has been a paper for a really long time, so whatever they say goes. No, They've been proven liars. CNN has been proven liars. Fox News has been proven liars. And yet people still send me these articles and say, look what this says. Well, I see what it says, but that doesn't mean it's the truth, you know? And so we rely so heavily on officials and that we don't want to use our own brains anymore. Not that I'm half convinced that people aren't even clicking the articles they're sending.
100%.
Like, I read them and I'm like, did you read this? Because it doesn't agree with you.
No, this is America. We are trained to read headlines and garner the appropriate amount of outrage from the headline alone. We do not read articles. Now, I had an interesting experience probably around 2009, 2010. I'm a big NASCAR nut. I'm motorsports, just love cars.
And that's a lot of fun. NASCAR is a lot of fun.
So when Twitter first came about, the NASCAR press were the first ones of sports journalists to jump on board and start interacting with fans.
Cool.
And so what I noticed was I suddenly had a one-on-one relationship and began to know the names of these journalists. Whereas before, when I was out driving, I would pick up the USA Today. Well, I didn't care I never looked at the byline. I didn't care who wrote it. I wanted the information. Right. Well, now I'm going, and I know Nate Ryan and Jenna Fryer and Jeff Gluck and Bob Procris, and I know these people's names. Well, then they start changing organizations that they work for. And Jeff Gluck even was with USA Today, had a tiff with them. So he quit and started his own website. And so he does this for about 2 years. And I met him at a race in Martinsville a couple of years ago, and he would do these tweet ups where he would meet with fans before the race. And I told him, I said, man, I've been waiting years for somebody to do what you do. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I've had a relationship with you now for X number of years because I follow Jeff Gluck because I trust Jeff Gluck. I don't care who you work for. So now you have your own deal. And I said, say there's 15 or 20 people in the NASCAR garage that are press. Well, if there's somebody I don't like, I can just unfollow them. Now, the hilarious part is I'm standing in a group of about 40 race fans, and probably half of them are already in the bottle. And I'm not going to say the name of the guy that I don't like, right? I'm just going to say, well, somebody I don't like, somebody's, yeah, like Jim Utter. And I wasn't going to say, yeah, Utter's a dick, you know, and they're just, and I could watch the collar drain out of Jeff's face because he's created this little group of people that support him directly. He's since gone on to work for somebody. But if somebody sucks as an individual, I can just do away with them with Twitter. Yeah. And that's what was so cool about Twitter coming on and giving me that direct one-on-one access to people that I know will tell me the truth. I don't care who they work for. Yep. And that was the beginning of that, where I could say, okay, well, I mean, it doesn't have to come from USA Today or Fox News or CNN. I can find someone like Ben Swan. Or Caitlin Johnstone, or people.
Oh, love Caitlin, man. She gives it to him, and I love her for it.
She does.
Jimmy Dore and Aaron Matei, I think, also deserve special mention because they're on the liberal side, but they had been speaking out against the Russia Trump stuff the entire time, and they took a lot of heat for it, but have, in my mind, made themselves have the most integrity, more so than any established press entity that's out there.
Yeah. It's just so fascinating that you have these people that will leave a comfortable job, you know, that, I mean, I've got to imagine they're making a pretty good living, you know, but they'll leave and go independent, not because they're guaranteed fame and fortune. You know, most of them are barely going to survive until they can get enough of an audience to maybe get their income up or back above where it was before. Now, I haven't followed, I'm aware of Tim Pool. I've watched his stuff with Rogan, and I've occasionally watched his stuff, but didn't he kind of come from just being an independent journalist? And look, I'm going to go out and see this and then report.
He covered the Occupy movement. Back in 2007, 2000, or I guess it would be 2008 because it was after the crash. And, you know, he was just sort of an on the ground reporter, and he worked for Vice. And then Vice just started to kind of like, now Vice used to do the kind of reporting that was like off the wall. It wasn't the stuff the regular corporate media would touch. And eventually they took part in that zeitgeist of we're going to side with our audience. And so Tim, having some integrity, decided he wasn't going to be part of that. And he was smeared for it. So even though Tim is what he would describe himself as a milk toast fence sitter, he still gets called right wing and all these kinds of things simply because he doesn't toe the line. Mm-hmm. One person I'll bring up in this category is Joe Rogan. Like Joe is just a kind of a comedian, kind of an idiot, but he has the most watched podcast on the planet right now. He has numbers that CNN and Fox combined together couldn't touch, because people want to listen to long form conversations with real people that aren't trying to sell them an agenda. People are aware for the most part that they're being sold agendas left and right. And they're so eager to hear just these long form conversations where you actually get into the nuance. And the flashing lights and all that stuff that make up the corporate press, that's not what people, we long for something different than that. And that's why he's so successful. And I remember when Joe Rogan had New York Times reporter Barry Weiss on, and she's just this kind of like, I think she's such a hack personally, but she gets on there and they start talking about Tulsi Gabbard. And just instantaneously, she hears the word Tulsi and she goes, oh, she's awful. She's an Assad toady. And Joe goes, what does that mean? And Barry just stops because she doesn't know.
Doesn't have a clue.
She just was told that and she just accepts it. And Joe pressed her, like, what do you mean she's an Assad toady? What does that mean? And she looks at Jamie and she goes, can you look that up?
I remember that.
It's like, so, and I hear people, and I as soon as Tulsi came out, I heard people who were on my friends list saying the same thing. Oh, Tulsi, she's a Russian agent. Like, where do you get that from?
You haven't listened to that woman talk for 5 seconds, She's
incredible. She's an incredible person. Like, she's really somebody who could reach across both aisles. She took Hillary Clinton out at the knee. I'll love her forever for that. That moment where she called her the queen of warmongers. I was just like, man, I love me some Tulsi. I don't care. I know I'm an anarchist and she supports Medicare for all, blah, blah, blah. You can hate me all you want. I love Tulsi Gabbard.
Listen, y'all, I'm an anarchist. I will trade the warfare state for the welfare state. You can have all the Medicare for all you want if you just shut down the Pentagon.
Holler. In the words of my people, holla.
Just shut down the Pentagon. I mean, the welfare budget is like a drop in an ocean compared to the Pentagon budget,
Absolutely.
But it's fascinating to me because
maybe just stop spending money on bombs that we're dropping hundreds of bombs, a bomb every 12 minutes, I think they said, lands on the Middle East. Where the hell are we getting that kind of money?
Right.
You got money for corporate bailouts, you got money for bombs, but you don't got you know what I'm saying? So I understand where that argument comes from people.
And I always come back to the market. Okay. Mm-hmm. Wherever there's always a market somehow, right? I can find a market principle in just about anything. Well, when you have a defense industry that is propped up by the state, mm-hmm. that is funded through taxation,
socialism,
and how dare you, and they, but they build all of these bullets, tanks, planes, and bombs, good American jobs, good, secure American jobs that are in congressional districts. Well, you can't just store all of those bullets, tanks, planes, and bombs. You got to use them. We got to have somebody to use them on, so you've created a market for destruction,
perpetual war that never has to end because it's on a nebulous idea called terrorism, which now apparently applies to our own citizens too. So they can be detained.
I would
definitely.
I would take my chances with ISIS over CNN and Fox News. In my mind, CNN and Fox have replaced ISIS and Al Qaeda as the worst terrorists on the planet.
Michael Malice says that the corporate press is the enemy of the people, and he refers to them as the cathedral, as this overarching, because it's the politics and the press are in bed together.
Oh, 100%.
And I think that's a brilliant way to describe it.
And I think people don't understand that we'll talk about something like a stateless society. And I remember, have you ever read The Market for Liberty? It was written in the 70s.
No, but I will write that down.
Yeah, write that down. It was like written in 1973 or something, but it was making the case, well, what would happen in a stateless society? And one of the points that they made, I need to dig that back up and read it again, but was, well, without the state, maybe the press would not be entangled with it and would be watching corporations. They would be watching, because this agriculture guy I was talking to, he's like, well, somebody's got to shut down the cheap stuff from China, so we've got to have, okay, well, in the absence of the state, then, if we're going to take away that responsibility to protect the consumer, which, I mean, in my view, the consumer should protect themselves, but, I'm just an idiot that, whatever. But the press, their job should be to investigate and inform, but the only thing we can get them to do is investigate and inform on the salacious, right. and on these things that provoke that response. So they'll come back and watch another
narrative
27 minutes of pharmaceutical ads. And
when the riots in Charlottesville were happening, and I was still a Democrat at this point, I was sat behind a pillow, terrified the entire time, glued to my television for 12 hours, watching that thing, thinking that the Nazi takeover was imminent. And I don't know how many pharmaceutical ads I watched in that time, but
I bet there's a bunch of them.
I bet it was a bunch. Yep.
Have you heard, where did I get that clip from? Have you ever heard of the No Agenda podcast?
No,
Adam Curry was a VJ back in the 80s on MTV, does a podcast with a guy named John C. Dvorak, who was a tech journalist back in the day. Adam Curry was just interviewed by Tom Woods last week, so it'll give you the...
Oh, I missed that. I'll have to go back and look for that.
Fantastic. Well, basically, No Agenda is a deconstruction of the media, and they play clips, and it's like a 3-hour show twice a week.
Yep.
And so they'll find these gold clips, and he's got this clip of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. telling a story to someone. Robert F. Kennedy is a kind of an activist for vaccine, vaccine safety and safety of children and health freedom and all that stuff.
Okay.
And he's telling a story about how he knew Roger Ailes, founder of Fox News, and or the president, and that they were completely opposite politically, but they were friends. And he's talking to Roger, and he had just completed some documentary about vaccines. And he's like, hey, I'd like to come on the network and talk about it. And he's like, I understand we're not going to show the documentary on Fox News, but, I can come and talk on it. And Roger says, can't let you do it. Matter of fact, if any one of my hosts were to let you on to talk about this, I would have to fire them.
Wow.
Because the pharmaceutical companies own these news agencies. And what's fascinating about listening to a show like No Agenda, when this all started in January, I had kind of laxed off of listening to them, and I'm like, well, I have to. So I start listening. I heard about hydroxychloroquine 4 weeks before Trump uttered the word.
Okay.
Because there was a French guy, that kind of their Dr. Fauci had said, listen, guys, hydroxychloroquine works. It worked on SARS-1. It works on SARS-2. He said in English, game over. Hydroxychloroquine is game over. All right. About 2 weeks later, Orange Man Bad said the word hydroxychloroquine and all hell broke loose. Okay. Mm-hmm. So they've dug into all the studies and these different, of course, doctors all over the place, family doctors, local practitioners have been saying, I've been using zinc, I've been using hydroxychloroquine, and I've been using Z-Pak to treat coronavirus. Mm-hmm. And look, I've turned over all the data, and of course, then they just get squashed and canceled and ignored. Mm-hmm. And then they play a clip of Neil Cavuto on Fox News saying, if you take hydroxychloroquine, it will kill you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm
and they had
going,
that story about the lady and her husband who ate fish tank cleaner, but it turns out the lady might have murdered her husband and then used this as an excuse. Like, ugh.
yeah,
Pretty
it's,
clever on her part, though, to be honest. Like, she
but
just barely got caught with that.
to think that, well, when I turned off the news 10 years ago, I was, and I don't remember who said this, and I wish I could, I'd give them credit, but they were like, turn off the news for 2 weeks. Don't watch the weather. Don't watch sports. Don't watch anything for 2 weeks. Turn it back on at the end of 2 weeks and you'll be able to hear how they talk to you. They talk to you like you're this incompetent, brainless amoeba that, you know, and I was able to hear that. Well, I can still hear that. And so for them to present this information in a way that they think that I couldn't just go get on the internet and go verify what they said. But of course they know, hell, people won't even read the article. They read the headline and, oh,
They
share.
don't even get all the way through the headline, man. I've posted some things sometimes and I can tell the person responding to me didn't even read half of the headline.
Keith Giles wrote a great little piece about, and had a picture of a guy with the rifle, and he was talking about, how do you know when America becomes a fascist state? That was the headline. So, well, I read it and it was beautiful. Talked about the kingdom and Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount, all this stuff, and talked about peace and love and finding that in Christ. And it was just a well written, but boy, he had that bait head. I dropped it in a narco-Christian group, and some poor guy, you know, he stumbled into it and he looked at that headline and I'm like, did you read the article? And he was like, not until after I commented, you know, and but it's so easy to just look at something and say, I'll tell you, here's the best example. Years ago, this right-wing guy that I was friends with shares an article from Fox News, and it says, Tyson Chicken trades Labor Day for Muslim holiday.
Oh, I think I remember this.
Can you believe I can't? Well, I read the article. Come to find out, in this one little area of Tennessee, there's a significant Somali population that lives near that plant.
Sure, yeah.
They had to work the holiday anyway, right? And they're like, well, can we trade Labor Day for this Muslim holiday? And Tyson's like, we don't care, whatever.
Seems reasonable.
Right. But Fox News. And so I commented on that. And I'm like, you didn't read that, did you? You know, because it was a request. It was a complete voluntary thing. But Fox News baited you in to believing that the Tyson Chicken Corporation was, you know, Labor Day was a socialist holiday, Captain Republican, you know.
But you know, my America. Oh, my America.
Yeah. And so I, you know, it's comic. That's the hard part, is because there's a lot of this stuff that I probably should take more seriously than I can't now. And I'll end up having the wrong reaction to people, because what I can laugh about in the narco-Christian group, I can't really laugh about that in public because, you know, but it's so tempting, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I do anyway. It just gets me in lots of trouble.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Craig and I
used to being in trouble because lots of people were always mad at me when I was an atheist. So it's not different for me now. It's just a different group of people that are mad at me now. But I'm used to this. Like
my poor pastor has, you know, he'll get messages and screenshots from stuff that I've, you know, can you believe? And he's like, yeah, I can. You know, if you got a problem with it, go talk to him. You know, I'm not the police.
What is he supposed to do about it? Like bonk you on the head and be like, no.
Yeah. Well, but he'll tell you that back in the day, that's what he was supposed to do. Well, you know, someone come to him about this. Well, I got to go over and talk to them, and then come back and we'll go over and talk to them. And now he's like, no, I'm not your morality police. I'm not your religious police. If you got a problem, go work it out with yourself. But he's such an awesome guy. And I feel bad for him because, listen, he's the most gracious human being I've ever met. And we had a guy that's known in this area for just being a troublemaker. And he starts coming to church because he'd been thrown out of every church in the valley. And of course, Jamie's going to show him grace. And this guy, I'm in the sound booth in the back of the church, and this guy comes up and starts his stuff with me. And I said his name. And I said, hear me clearly. Jamie Wright is the most gracious human being on planet Earth. I am not. I will throw you through that window. Get out of my face. You know, and he just kind of looked at me like, Okay. And walked off, because look, you're going to get grace from him, but my grace has limits. Okay. Jesus has no limits.
Says they're going to throw you through a window, you should believe them.
Walk away. Just walk away. So it's been, but here's what's crazy. And you would probably love this. So like my best friend and his wife and me and my wife and pastor and his wife, and we all have these amazing conversations because we're not afraid to talk about them. Well, what if there is no hell? What if, this end times prophecy is actually back over here? And well, what if this meant that? And what if that meant this? And the conversations are so incredible because we're not laden with the fear of, well, don't you dare question that. Or don't you, and that's what's so freeing because we can change our minds. Because see, the eternal conscious torment fell apart for me when I looked at the passage in John where he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Okay. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Which up to that point, God was never really presented as Father. He was presented as, omnipotent master, You've seen me, you've seen the Father. I'm like, there's nothing about this guy that tells me I'm going to roast you forever.
Right. I think that too. I find it so difficult to consolidate those two concepts of an eternal torture and a loving God. A loving God would not do that.
Right. Yeah. And I also think that, and I'm still working this one out, but I'm trying to, people will say, well, if God's real, why does he let bad things happen? And I'm like, okay, we live in 2020 where we can literally fly. Yeah. There was no airplanes in the Garden of Eden. There was no hazardous chemicals in the Garden of Eden. There was no radiation. There was no RF frequencies. There was no 5G. But we're so accustomed to strapping ourselves in a 3,000-pound piece of metal and driving at speeds that the body was not designed to handle, Sure. And I saw a guy the other day, he was really struggling with the idea of, the Sermon on the Mount and violence. And he's like, well, should I watch football or, MMA? And I'm like, dude, I watched Dale Earnhardt die right in front of me. Like he was like 500 yards that way. And I watched it happen. He didn't get in that car that morning and think, well, this is it. I'm going to go die today. But when you ride for 40 years on the edge, eventually you're going to step over that line and you hit a wall going 175 miles an hour and bad shit's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So here we are with this fragile body that is so incapable of surviving the elements. But we've grown up this amazing market with these amazing air conditioners and heaters and insulation and car safety and then we're mad at God when bad stuff happens. And I'm like, yeah, but we do dumb stuff.
Yeah.
We do a lot of dumb stuff. Mm-hmm. I ride on 40 tons of engine and steel for a living, and don't even think twice about it, Mm-hmm. So I wish we would, have
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand that too. Cause I think that it's really hard to reconcile the idea that a 4-year-old child gets cancer and dies from it. Like that's just something so inconceivable to us. Like why would God do that? Kind of thing. And I don't know enough about God's ways to say that he's individually giving this child cancer or whatever it is. Like God's ways are not human ways. So we don't understand how that influences the universe or what part of the plan that is. And it's hard to understand why our loved ones get torn away from us, why we have to go through grief, why I experience anxiety and depression, for example, that can lay me so low that I can't even get out of bed. And I live in the most prosperous time that Earth has ever experienced. I'm in the top 1% of wealth of all human beings in history. And something is wrong in my brain that makes me feel like I can't even get out of bed because I'm so depressed. Make that make sense to me, but I understand that God's ways are not our ways. And things that have given us great tragedy have also given us a place to rise. So, for example, the Black Plague is directly responsible for the Renaissance. There would not have been a Renaissance and there would not have been an Enlightenment without 50 to 70% of Europeans dying horribly. Now, to the individuals who perished or the family members who watched them do that, I can understand not knowing why this is, but history is on this long arc. And that arc, in my view, has always bent toward improving the condition of human beings. We have taken, for example, the numbers of people who live in abject poverty over the last 30 years has decreased by almost half. So we can't necessarily look and say, okay, I see a person in poverty and I'm angry with God because I don't understand why this person should starve to death, without the perspective of understanding that half of the people who would have been starving before are not now. And then you can even put that on a longer time scale. In the year 1800, almost everyone on Earth was living in that kind of poverty. And now it's a handful of people by comparison to the population. So it's like this centralization on the individual in why would God do this to me, kind of thing. I have to tell myself and remind myself that God's ways are not my ways. Some things are going to seem incredibly cruel to me, and I'm not going to understand them. But I trust that there's an arc and like an arc going on here that I don't get, and that I have to be okay with that. I have to be okay with not understanding everything and not being able to frame everything in a little bow and a little package that makes sense to me. I'm a human being. I live in a 3-dimensional universe. Like, my little simian brain cannot concept all of these things, especially my place in the arc of history. What will the world look like 100 years from now? It will be inconceivable to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Army of Darkness with Bruce Campbell. There's a scene, he gets transported back to the medieval era, and he's just a hardware store guy. He's not like a hero or an adventurer or anything like that, but he's got his shotgun with him. And he's doing this speech where he's explaining that this is a boomstick and it retails for $9.95 at S-Mart. And basically 90% of the words that are coming out of this man's mouth, the medieval people around him cannot even understand. The words have no frame of reference for them. And I have thought about that so often. Like, if you took a person from that era and you brought them here, they would be astonished to stand in a Walmart and look at the glittering, bright rows of food that seem endless and are attainable for almost every human being. It's damn near a miracle. Electric light, to have the night lit is a miracle. And we don't have that perspective because we're surrounded by it. But we live in an incredible time, and I think that 100 years from now, what will be the world at that point will seem like a miracle to us, things we can't imagine. Like, we don't know that in the eventuality of time, having seen a 4-year-old die of cancer will inspire doctors to get medical degrees and study these things and be able to cure these things. Like, there is an arc here that is beyond our knowledge, and I trust in it. And that's what faith is, to have trust in something you can't understand that surpasses you, and to say, okay, I acknowledge that this is bigger than me, and I'm going with it anyway.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that we get lost in that, where we don't my dad one time said, man, the 60s was the time to live. And I'm like, why? And he said, well, you had all the modern conveniences and everything was cheap. Well, I hung on to that for a little while, for, I don't know, up into my probably late 20s, longing for, well, we need to just get back to this and get back to that. And you hear that now. Well, make America great again. Oh, who was
Nostalgia
it?
is so powerful.
Somebody said, and I don't remember who it was, romanticizing the past and forsaking the present or something like that. It was, I don't remember who said that. Might have been Thaddeus Russell. But we're looking back at things that we think were better, you know, but if I can at least take myself back to about 78, 2 years old, and thinking about through the 80s and into the early 90s. And I'm thinking, I don't want to go back to that. I mean, there's some simplicity there. I don't want to go back to having a pager. I don't want to go back to driving a truck and having to, I couldn't imagine having to talk to my kids on a payphone for 5 minutes every other day, we're now video chat and, and just call and text. And I've heard people say, we need to get back to the good old days of trucking. And I'm like, are you talking about the days when I didn't have an iPhone, I didn't have an iPad, satellite radio, GPS? I had a paper map and a CB, and I had to stand in a truck stop phone room with one to each ear, standing in a cloud of cigarette smoke you couldn't see through, waiting on somebody to tell me to call back, hang up and call back in 2 hours. No, y'all can take the good old days and shove them. Okay. I don't want any part of the good old days.
Rose-colored glasses, they say.
Oh, yeah. And it's terrible. Of course, when you were talking about bringing someone forward, 500 years, and I automatically think about idiocracy, and thinking that's where we're headed, but I think we know that innovation is going to take us to those next levels, because I'm sure there were a lot of, policies of the state and, policies and procedures that in 1975 or 1985 would have been said that people were convinced, well, this is the end, and this is the best it'll ever get. I mean, it's literally not going to get better than it is right now. And I'm thinking, no, it will. It's going to be better. Mm-hmm. And I think we may live, I mean, I'm 44. I think I may live to see the collapse of the nation state. I think that's possible in my life.
I think that's coming a lot faster than people realize. I mean, things like that, they go very slowly and then they go very fast.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Carlin's, what was it called? Blueprint for Armageddon.
Huh.
He did a detailed analysis of everything leading up to World War I. And I don't think I've talked to a single person, no matter what kind of politics they have, they know that the ground is rumbling. And these kind of things, they go slow. There's a slow crawl, and then they happen extremely fast. And I don't think it's going to be that we're going to be old people when that happens.
Well, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, how long would it take for us to switch over to, a blockchain-based currency? I'd have been, 10 years. Right. Now I'm like, 18 months.
Yeah. Are we there yet?
Yeah. I'm thinking, which is, it's difficult because like my best friend and I have really dug into trying to understand blockchain and crypto and have demystified it. We kind of understand what it is and how it works and the practical applications. And so we're sitting there going, okay, come on, let's go. We're ready. And you want that fast forward button and you just can't do it.
Yeah.
And of course, then the last 6 months happened and we're like, well, there's the fast forward button.
There's a quote that I really love, which is that nature does not hurry and everything still gets done. It's not on our clock,
That's good. That's really good. Well, I think, I don't know how far we've gone now. Oh my gosh, we've done an hour and a half.
Wow.
That went by quick.
That didn't seem like an hour and a half at all.
Well, I had this idea because I love Rogan. Like you said, I love the long form. I hate watching people get shoved into a little box where they can't let it breathe. They can't let it go where it's going to go. And I'm thinking, okay, well, why not have that Joe Rogan type experience for just regular people, that can have conversations, but I wanted to talk to people that have gone through something. I wanted to talk to people that have experienced some sort of transformation, not to just spew that same garbage that they're just regurgitating from somebody else. So
yeah.
That's why I wanted to start this project, just to be able to do this. And so next week I'm doing a conversation with Jacob Daniel and Abby Kleckner about pacifism.
Oh,
and,
I just love Abby. She's the greatest.
Oh yeah, she's precious. And so I guess I'm kind of moderator.
Jacob, you're cool too.
Yeah. But I think that's going to be an interesting conversation, because I tried to look into pacifists during the American Revolution, because there had to be somebody that were like, nah, y'all go ahead and kill each other. I'm out. And so, I want to define pacifism, okay, what is it we're talking about here? And then go the for and against. And I think you have to have that balance. If we're going to say, all right, yes, this is a time to engage in either defensive or aggressive behavior for some cause, well, then there's got to be somebody on the other side saying no, so that we just don't end up Game of Thrones, which I still have yet to watch, but that just popped into my head. So I'm told that have you watched Handmaid's Tale?
I haven't. I find the whole thing a little ham-fisted and narrative driven.
I'm told
I'd like to experience it, because I know that Margaret Atwood did not write that with that in mind. Yeah. And I need to maybe wait till some of this political stuff dies down before I think I can absorb it as a literary work.
Well, I've told people have told me, well, you have to watch Game of Thrones and you have to watch Handmaid's Tale to get there's some sort of liberty thing in there. But I don't know. I
mean, Game of Thrones is just excellently done. I will warn you, though, that they really overplay the sex in the first season. And I think that's just an effect of being on HBO, and they want to keep people's interest and stuff like that. And I'm not bothered by sex. It's not something that triggers me or anything, but I was just like, this is just overdone. Yeah. But after that, the plot is so excellent that it's just power through that, please. And keep going, because the plot really is excellent. And I recommend it for sure. I really enjoyed Game of Thrones.
Where are you at on the Hunger Games?
I loved Hunger Games. I definitely recommend reading it before watching the movies, because there's some nuance in there that you're not going to get from the movies. But the movies were excellently acted by all of the actors, and they were very faithful to the books as much as a movie can be.
Whoever the casting director was.
Now, if I might recommend what I think is kind of an anarchistic type series, is Deadwood on HBO.
I need to watch that.
Deadwood is incredible, because it's about a community mining camp that existed outside of the U.S. territories. It technically existed on Sioux land. And these people basically had to live in an anarchistic society. Now, if you are sensitive to cursing, that is not the show for you, because it's every other word, because these are rough men living on the edge of chaos. But this country was built by hookers and gamblers and toothless miners.
Have you read, Thaddeus
Russell, the Renegade History of the United States? Yes.
I love
and
that.
You got to realize that these kind of lowbrow people, these are the people that built this nation. And in a way, I know these are prostitutes, but they built this country, and we got to have some respect for them in that regard. And I think Deadwood is such an excellent example. It was written by David Milch, who unfortunately passed away. He had Alzheimer's. But what he left in Deadwood, I think, is a great tome to anarchy in all the positive ways that I mean anarchy, not the way that Kaylee McNally means anarchy. But yeah, Deadwood. Just, if you don't like cursing, don't watch it. But other than that, it's really good.
I like cursing. My wife saw a t-shirt that says I love Jesus, but I cuss a little,
I had a dream when I was an atheist, like 10 years ago. I had this dream where Jesus was there and I was speaking with him and he gave me a hug. And when he was hugging me, I said, I'm not a Christian. And he says, it's okay, neither am I. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, I was like, to this day, I don't remember many of my dreams, but I remember that one. And specifically him saying, oh, don't worry, neither am I.
Well, I gotta tell you this. Have you ever heard of theophostic counseling?
No.
Okay, so I had this amazing experience. There's a guy, he's a colleague, I guess you could say, of my pastor. His name's Nathan Blouse. Mm-hmm. He has a website called inthesafeplace.com or org. It's The Safe Place. The Safe Place. So we're told he's coming to church and he's going to do these sessions over the weekend, and and it's a prayer session, but it's also counseling. And I'm thinking, well, I got some issues, I'll sit down with him. Why not?
Who doesn't?
Right. So we sit down and we begin to talk, and he's going through, he does some kind of standard fair questions, and he's asking about my parents, and he's trying to dig in, I'm like, and I finally went, dude, look, listen, my best friend calls my mom and dad George and Jim Cleaver. There's nothing there. Okay. I promise you. So he moves on and he goes, so how about a first love? Y'all, I collapsed into 1,000 pieces in front of this guy. And he's like laid back in the chair and he's like, oh, I think we found something. So anyway,
that's your breakthrough moment.
So what basically what they do is you go, it's like being in a building and you go to these rooms and there are these doors that are locked and there's like 17 locks. And he's like, oh, there's one. Let's go in there. And you're like, no, Nate, I don't want to go in there. Well, let's go in there anyway. So you go in and he takes me to this place where, I see myself in my tractor trailer, in the bed, curled up in a fetal position, just losing it. And he says, now, where's Jesus? And the camera pans in my mind. And there he is. Okay. Ended up going through this after my best friend of 25 years passed away. And because I was a wreck, I was a just complete mess. Yeah. And it takes me to the bedroom on the other end of this house where I was when I got the phone call at 12:30. And it's like, where's Jesus? Camera pounds out, standing right there. Mm-hmm. So it takes you to the root of these traumatic or I don't know what's another word for that, but these bad experiences, the root, and shows you, number one, that Jesus was there the whole time. Mm-hmm. But it goes in and it cleans out the infection, and then, so the first time I did this, I've done 3 sessions. The first time I walked out of that room, I felt 400 pounds lighter. It just changed my whole world because I didn't know I'd been dragging that around for 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then after my best friend dies and we go through and I was able to release him, let him go to where now, like, I can tell the whole story of how that happened. And I don't break up and fall apart, and I can't finish the sentence. And so such a profound experience because it's less therapy and counseling and more prayer session where you're going in and you're allowing the Spirit to take you to the places you don't want to go. And so now my best friend's wife is like training to do that. And she had so many of these just transformative experiences where you go in and you just root it out, and it's not making it go away. You can't say that it didn't happen. Of course it happened, right? But it neutralizes it, and it's just incredible what happens in those sessions. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And
that's
there's
wonderful.
There's nothing like it, And
I've had a similar experience. I was in church. I only got to go to church for 6 weeks because it took me a lot of courage to get together, the courage to go to church. And I finally did it. And I was going for the 6th week in a row, and then Corona happened and they stopped the services.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was hard on me because like I tried to do the online, and seeing the empty pews like hurt me in a way that I wasn't prepared for, like upset. But on the 6th week we were in there, and I have a lot of trauma with like my parents, for example. I was, somewhat neglected as a child. And the pastor said, don't behave as though you don't have a father, because you do. And I almost started weeping openly in front of that 200 member, maybe even more than that, hundreds of member congregation, because the idea of that I didn't realize could affect me so deeply, just hearing the words, you do have a father. Yeah. And it's just like, you don't realize it until somebody touches that nerve. You don't realize how raw it is. And having that touched can change everything for you. Just that little moment. This pastor, he doesn't even realize he affected me in this way. But him saying that to me, I carry that all the time when I feel really low. I remind myself, you do have a father. You have a father who wants great things for you and who loves you more than you can imagine. And what couldn't a girl do if she had a father who loved her, and it's incredible the way that things can be rephrased for you. They can be repositioned for you.
I'll have to dig up the link, but there's a guy named, I think I sent you a Paul White thing before, but he was at our church. He did three messages on a weekend. And one of them, he talked about both the father and mother aspects of God. Mm-hmm. And the way he kind of broke that down, I had never, he was talking about the bosom, when you hear about the father's bosom, that's, that there is a motherly female aspect of God, but we kind of ignore that. And he really broke that down in a way that was pretty profound. So
okay, I'll look into that because I take notes when I'm talking to people, and I'm like practically filling this page up by just talking to you for an hour.
Yeah, it's and I'll try to put some links to this on the podcast feed. Okay. But it's just I've got. I call them the four horsemen. I've got Jamie Wright, Jamie Englehart, Paul White, and Dr. Lynn Hiles. Dr. Lynn Hiles does a lot of really fascinating stuff on the book of Revelation. And dude's got a photographic memory. So he has memorized essentially the book of Revelation in the King James and has almost got the Message version of it memorized. So when he's talking, now his style is a little Southern hellfire and brimstone kind of. All right. He's real high energy, but okay. Dude, the way he ravels, but he's got like, I don't know, 139 episodes on YouTube about the book of Revelation. And it's all he starts is this is a revelation of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. It's not a revelation of anything else but Jesus. Mm-hmm. And then he's off. So with these four guys, they're different teaching styles and they all come from just a little bit different, but
imagine that diversity and nuance. Imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah. But it also, they reject a lot of, and these are the kind of guys that will say, like I've heard Englehart say, if you find something I preached 20 years ago, burn it,
the same goes for me. If you find some shit that I said 20 years ago, it doesn't count.
Oh yeah. Facebook memories. Yeah. Fortunately for me, my dipping into liberty started like within weeks of joining Facebook. So it's only every once in a while there will be some pop up that some neoconservative just off the wall thing, but most of the time I can look back and go, yeah, I could repost that,
whereas I have to look at all this monstrous SJW leftist culture and be like, I helped create this.
Yeah, but nobody understands it better than you do. That's true. And I can't remember the guy's name, but he was on with Pete Quinones.
I love Pete. Pete's fiery and I like it.
It was in the last couple of episodes, and he was talking about, he's talking about everything that's going on now. And of course, he's talking about the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and all this stuff. So it's not a doom and gloom episode, because he's saying now is the time for liberty-minded people to speak up, to be loud, don't hide, don't waver, don't pause. We've got to keep going through. We got to keep pushing. We got to keep talking. We got to have conversations like this, so that, because, I've got the live open here and I'm watching, there's not a whole lot of interaction, but there's a lot of people that will never interact with this video, but they'll watch it. We'll never know it. They'll never comment. They'll never like, they'll never share, but they'll sit here and they might be able to hide in their bedroom with the covers pulled up over their head and watch this video and be influenced, whereas they would never in a million years tell anybody that they watched this video, and I'm totally fine with that. We'll keep your secret. Don't worry. So
you're allowed to listen to people you don't agree with. Like, you're allowed to. And that's something that, like, I had to learn how to do. I had to force myself to do it. It was hard because I felt like I was betraying something. And you're not betraying anything. Just to listen. Just to open your mind to people who might not have the similar ideas that you do. It's okay. I give you permission.
I don't remember who pointed it out to me, but, we so easily talk about the Good Samaritan, right? The Good Samaritan. Y'all realize the only reason he was good was because he was bad, right? Because
the Samaritans were not cool.
Right. But we just completely blow past that. Oh, it's a Samaritan. He was good. Yeah. But see, if you don't know the context, you don't know how much they hated the Samaritans.
Yep.
That the guy that y'all hated the most was the one that came and help take care of that guy.
It's like, if you're a liberal, imagine somebody in a MAGA hat. You know what I'm saying? Like, the word, like, you can imagine somebody who's worse, like a freaking MAGA hat coming up to help you. Yeah. It might change your perspective just a little bit, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And I think I've seen some people, there's a black guy, Seymour Views or something like that on Instagram, where he's walking through the inner city, and he's talking, and he's a Trump guy.
Okay.
Right. But what's interesting about him is he'll walk up to some random 4 black guys. Right. And he'll start talking to them, and they'll, yeah, Trump this, Trump that. And he's like, yeah, but he didn't say that. He didn't really say that.
Right.
And they're like, what? Man, he didn't say that. Here's what he really said,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going, really? And he'll turn these guys. Now, granted, he's turning them toward Trump, which, whatever. But the point is, he's willing to walk up and have that conversation with them and at least say, that's not what he said. That's not what happened. Here's what actually happened. And I'll be willing to tell you about it. And you can see like an appreciation. Number one, you talked to me and you cared enough to say, well, yeah, but that's not what really happened. Here's what really did happen. Here's what was really said. Here's what,
right.
But most of us are scared that we don't, or we'll face rejection or don't want to make somebody mad. I mean, listen, I have filtered myself so many times just because I don't want my pastor to get a bunch of crap from somebody,
If my Facebook friends found my Twitter feed, I'm convinced a lot of them would no longer talk to me. So yeah, I completely get that. Yeah, you have to, like, if you want to operate in the world, and that's a difficult thing for Christians too, to operate in the world,
Yeah. Well, operate without fear, that, it's like cooties, and it's going to get on you,
Yeah. But it's like, these people, they've known me for years, some 10 or 20 years. You can't turn around and say, oh, you just don't care about poor people. Like, come on, you know better than that. Like, you've known me a long time. Like, you know better than that. So, I present a little bit of a difficulty for a lot of people because they know that I'm not coming from that perspective of, well, I just don't like black people. I just don't like poor people. That's clearly not who I am.
Yeah.
So
I was just going back with a forth with a friend of mine over voting, lesser of two evils and all that. And eventually after the back and forth, and he's like, so it, it doesn't matter to you who gets it. And I went, nope.
It literally will not make one iota of difference. It
No.
really won't.
You can choose the maniacal psychopath or the pedophile with dementia, and the empire is going to empire. The same domestic policies, the same foreign policies, the same monetary policies. Nothing's going to change.
They don't care who the mascot is. That's not who's in charge.
No. And when I try to point out, especially with progressives, because you have to have a little bit of a different tact, and they'll say, well, don't you want to have X? And I'll say, here's the thing. I am unwilling to trade the lives for the lives of the millions of people across the globe that will be killed in order to have X.
Yeah.
I'm unwilling to. So if in order to have healthcare and schools and yada, 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 I also have to have this violent, evil, authoritarian state, I'll just figure out another way to have the healthcare, the schools, and the whatever else. I'm no longer willing to trade the lives 30 million people in the last 75 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's another conservative estimate.
Another thought exercise that I like to give to people is, you want to feed the poor, right? Like, you think that the poor should have food. I do too. And they're like, yeah, definitely. And I was like, do you think you have the right to go into your neighbor's house and take his wealth and redistribute it? Like, if you think the poor should be fed, do you take it upon yourself to break into your neighbor's house and take his things and sell them to feed the poor? I said, well, of course not. I would never do that. Well, why do you farm up your violence to another entity so that they can do it for you? Because really, at the end of the day, the government is taking people's wealth at the point of a gun. Because if you don't agree to follow the rules of this supposed contract, which doesn't really follow any definition of a contract I've ever heard before, they'll kill you, or they'll put you in a cage. So if you wouldn't kill your neighbor, you wouldn't put him in a cage in order to feed a poor person, why is it okay for you to farm that up to others? And I've had a little bit of success with that, not entirely, but like, to me, that's a no-brainer. If you wouldn't steal from your neighbor, then why are you giving others permission to do it in your name? And, that's just kind of where I come from that perspective. Like, we all want to feed the poor. Let's find a way to do it where we're not bonking our neighbor over the head and taking his stuff from him. Because I would never do that. You would never do that. Most rational people, even who consider themselves to be socialists, would never do that.
Right.
Why is it okay for the state? It's not.
And the 30,000 foot view of the last 6 months is state action, protests. Okay. Well, those protests are good. State action, protest. Oh, no, those protests are bad. State action, protest. Oh, those protests are good. State action, protest. Oh, those protests are bad. All right. So I'm seeing a lot of people now that are like cheering on the tear gassing of protesters and, supposedly grabbing people in vans, which are probably just operatives that are, being called to picked up, but
yeah, I got some uncomfortable stuff to say. We don't got time to get into that, but I've got some things to say about that.
But, I went to a protest in Charleston, a Liberty thing. There was
right. I remember telling you to be safe. I remember.
Yeah.
And here you are. You're safe. So
me
good.
And 25 other people.
Yeah.
But we've had friends that have been very active in Columbus, Ohio at the protest. And so they're all convinced that they're correct and they're going to go and protest. Well, then, George Floyd happens in Minneapolis and, Breonna Taylor and all these things. And then the other protests start. And I saw a lady this morning is like, Trump needs to send in the military. And I'm like, yeah, more violence. That'll fix it. And she says, she opened the door. Well, what would you do instead? So first,
I'm so glad you asked.
First, I would recognize that state violence is what got us here in the first place.
Right.
Right. If you watch the Joe Rogan interview that he did with Malcolm Gladwell, where he started out talking about Sandra Bland, and then he got to Ferguson, Missouri, And he said, all we know is that cop shot Michael Brown and all hell broke loose. But the real story was that was a powder keg looking for a place to explode.
Yep.
That local government there in Ferguson, Missouri was so corrupt, was so evil, was so tyrannical that had made those people's lives a living hell for a very long time. And it was the cops that were enforcing it. And when that cop shot Michael Brown, all hell broke loose. Right.
So I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
So you're going to have to understand that it was law enforcement that enforced that tyranny on those people in Ferguson, Missouri, that created the conditions that led to that outbreak. So you're going to have to understand that when you start waving your flag and talking about how much you support law enforcement, those people are not big fans of law enforcement. So when the people in the inner city that are these cities are absolute cesspools, not because of the people, because of they're mafia. They're no different.
All the state is a mafia. That's all it can be.
But it's like, I think these cities are even worse. They're like another level of evil. Chicago and New York and LA, and they
just because in terms of how much money they're able to command is what makes them so evil. So it's just writ large.
Yeah. And, so you're going to have to accept, and I'm like, how would you feel if you're out walking around without a mask? Because this particular lady's down in Florida and she's livid over a mask mandate. So I said, okay, you're walking around without a mask, and a cop comes and throws you on the ground and puts you in handcuffs and locks you up. And then somebody says, hey, don't question that cop. He's a hero. You're going to be like, no, he's a dirtbag. Okay. Then we're going to have to make, the differentiation between someone who has sworn an oath to the Constitution to preserve life, liberty, and property, and acting that out versus someone who is basically the leg breakers for the mafia, and if you're a leg breaker for the mafia, I got no respect for you. You're not going to get any respect from me.
Yep.
Did you watch the Bundy thing when it went down? The Bundys?
You're talking about Amon Bundy?
Yeah.
So I knew about the Wildlife Refuge Center, but I wasn't on top of that. They've been active during this COVID thing too. And I have been watching them through that.
So it's interesting.
The one who retweeted that video of them trying to attend a public meeting that they wouldn't allow the public to attend.
Right.
And I was
shut it down.
I gained a tremendous amount of respect for him in that video. Cause I was like, I didn't realize that this guy's literally, he's fighting for my freedom. He's putting his own body in the way of a state that would oppress me. And I'm like,
so you look at it in context. This all began because the Bundys lived out west. I want to say Nevada, right on the, Nevada, Arizona, everything. And there was this BLM land, Bureau of Land Management, which was funny when Black Lives Matter first started. When I see BLM, I think Bureau of Land Management because of the Bundys. Okay. Yeah. So the ranchers had these agreements that they could graze their cattle on the government land. Well, surprise, surprise, the government changes the rules in the middle of the game. And they say, well, now you owe us millions of dollars. And the Bundys are like, no, we're not doing it. Yeah. And so the standoff happens. And so you've got ranchers on horses. And I remember I wasn't fully into anarchism then, but I'm looking at them going, you're literally waving the flag of the people you're fighting. Cognitive dissonance. Okay. So then the wildlife refuge thing happens. Ammon gets arrested. Lavoy Finicum is murdered by that cop.
And I know a lot of people frame that as he ran at them, but it is clear that he did not. He was murdered by the state. That man was murdered. Yeah. And everybody just kind of went, that's what you get.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's fascinating, okay, is so they've gone through all of this. Ammon goes to prison for 2 years, gets out, wrote those letters from prison.
And he's still doing it. God bless him.
Yeah. And has not backed down an inch. Well, he posted a video on his YouTube and then put it in on Facebook. And it was some little meeting, and he was explaining why he was going to attend a defund the police thing with Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the bootlickers in the I'm done with you. That's it. We're done here.
You're not telling my narrative anymore.
You're a Marxist, and they don't even know what Marxist means. That's the new N word. They're not allowed to say the N word, so now they can say Marxist.
And this happens on the left too. And I often attack the left because I come from the left, so it seems like I kind of give the right a pass. And it's like, no, I don't come from the right. That's not my area to attack.
Yeah.
The left does that too, where I'm with you until you do something slightly off of my narrative, and then it's like, oh, I can't even deal with you anymore.
Yeah. So they, and Ammon, if you watch the video, of course, not just be triggered to outrage by the headline, he makes a great point, and I didn't think about this until after he said it, but he said, we do delegate in this society with this system of government, we do delegate to certain people the ability to arrest. Okay. Well, who is that? Somebody's like county sheriff. Exactly. We elect the county sheriff. He's accountable to the people. He deputizes whoever he needs to carry out that duty. And Ammon makes the point. He's like, guys, the problem are these state troopers and city cops. They're the ones that are really outside the reach. They're the ones that are they're unaccountable. And I thought, I wonder how many times have we seen a deputy sheriff engaged in police brutality? I would wager a guess it's almost never. I'm not saying it's never happened, but when you look at the number of times, Eric Garner, that was New York City, Michael Brown, Ferguson City, George Floyd, Ferguson City, Minneapolis City.
Minneapolis, yeah.
Breonna Taylor, Louisville City, and so he's saying, yeah, we need to get the government to stop funding these police departments where they have to sign these memorandums of understanding that they'll carry out the law the way daddy says to carry it out. If you want the check, come on over and get you some money. Here's a check. Come and get your check. Or
here's a bunch of military equipment from Iraq from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That now you can play soldier with.
Yeah. So it's trying to have that conversation. Of course, after reading Thaddeus Russell's book, makes me want to go find a drag queen and thank them for their service,
Right.
And, but
absolutely.
Why have we gotten ourselves in this position where we have taken cops and soldiers who have been given that right to use violence and then placed them up on this pedestal and unwilling to question them and unwilling to hold them accountable? If a truck driver ran over a family, and wiped out a family of 6, well, there's not a chance I'm going to be like, well, I mean, he's a truck driver. He's a brother. I have to defend him.
Right.
That's not, the guy's a dirtbag. Get rid of him.
You hear that all the time. You're like, well, they do such a dangerous job. And I'm like, well, crab fishermen do a dangerous job too, but they'd still go to jail if they killed somebody. Like, that's not an argument.
I'm somewhere between 5 and 8 times more likely to be killed on the job than a cop as a truck driver, And
I bet you haven't killed anybody yet.
Not yet. Now, doesn't mean I ain't thought about it.
I mean, guilty.
Listen, there's been times that if I could have had a rocket launcher on the front of my truck, somebody would have got splattered. I'm just saying. But it's is what it is. But at least we can have the conversation now, and present it in a way that people can consume it if they want to. And if they don't,
just got to make it available. And that's the great thing about programs like this, is that like it's no longer centralized through gatekeepers. We're allowed to have this conversation. We're allowed to put it out there, and anybody who wants to watch it can. Even if you hate everything we're saying right now, which, I posted this on my Facebook wall. I'm quite sure if there are some people who, if they listen to our conversation, would be pretty mad at me right now. But at the same time, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to hear a conversation that actually pisses you off, instead of having a corporate news media organization tell you everything you want to hear. but that isn't anywhere close to the truth. And so, this is necessary. This is tending that light of Western enlightenment, even in a very small way.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate you joining me. Let me throw out. Well, why don't you plug your stuff, and that way I don't have to butcher it for you.
My stuff. Oh, okay. So I have a YouTube channel. I have the Jessica Green Show on there. It's kind of potpourri. I don't put anything out on a regular basis, just when I feel like I have something to say. And then I also run the 100 Nights of Horror movie challenge. It's the largest horror movie challenge on the internet, which we just started 2 days ago. So if you guys want to get involved in that and you have the stomach to watch 100 mind-bending horror movies until Halloween night, please come join us. We'd like to have you. We're on Facebook and Twitter. I'm the Libertarian Kitchen Witch on Twitter. Even if you disagree with me, please come have a conversation with me. As long as you're respectful, I think that we can find some common ground. So I appreciate people who disagree with me just as much as those who agree with me. So feel free to come chop it up with me on Twitter.
And your handle?
Oh, it's at LIBTKIT Witch, WITCH. So Libet Kitchen Kit Witch.
So did you change that from Anarchy to Word?
I did.
Okay.
I hated that at, so I changed it. Yeah, I do Libertarian Kitchen Witch. Also, I'm working on doing a soup club for November. So that's something that's coming down the pipeline, and that'll be available on my YouTube channel as well. So basically all my stuff is Twitter and YouTube. I don't have an Instagram. I don't plan on getting one.
Okay. Well, it was a pleasure. That was 2 hours and 6 minutes. That went by quick. I like it.
Unbelievably fast. I had so much fun.
Yeah, I did too. Well, I appreciate you being here. I'll have this up on the podcast feed shortly and on my YouTube channel. And until then, we will talk to you later.